Hi, I'm Hamada and I'll be doing the mock lesson for you today. So, just before I begin, I just wanted to mention a few things, if that's okay. So first of all, I'm going to be teaching a mock student called Sammy. So he has a little bit of basic coding knowledge, so he's not completely fresh. And secondly, so when I'm coding as if I'm him, I am going to be making a few mistakes here and there intentionally so that I can correct Sammy. So on that caveat, yeah, I'll begin. Morning, Sammy. How you doing? Great. How's your day been? How's your holidays? Enjoying it? Wicked. Well, are you excited for some coding today? Well, I am. Let's get cracking. So hopefully you're going to enjoy today's lesson. So, I've got an interesting problem here for you to solve. We're going to solve it together. It's going to kind of build up our for loops, if statements, kind of gel that knowledge together for us, hopefully. So I'm going to give you a few seconds to just read the problem at the top here, and then we'll go through it together. Good, okay, so hopefully you've read it by now. So let's read it together and let's just take some of your thoughts. So, in a non-existent land far, far away, there is a robotic monster which loves eating anything except rubbish. You write a function that mimics this monster's behavior. So here's some examples. So the functions that we're going to be writing is called eat, and it's going to take in what is this that it's going to be taking in, Sammy? Can you tell me? What data type is that? What data structure is that? Excellent, it's a list. Good. And a list is just, it's going to contain, different items, different data types. In this case, you have some strings, some integers. They're separated by commas. Excellent, well done. And what's it going to return? Good, we're going to return another list. That's really important to know what you're going to be taking in and what you're going to be taking, what's going to be coming out of your function. So we're going to be returning a list. Good. So, do you remember what the first thing we need to do before we just rush into code? Because we really don't want to rush into code. Excellent. So in this case, we see there's lots of unnecessary information that we want to remove, right? Do you remember the key terminology for removing unnecessary information? Perfect. Been revising, well done. Abstraction. Good, so let's write it here. So remember, we're going to use comments. So comments are with a hash that tells Python to ignore this line. Abstraction. So if we're going to use abstraction to remove the unnecessary details from this problem, what is our abstraction going to be? What are we going to get at the end of it? Once we remove all the unnecessary information, what are we essentially doing here? Excellent. It's quite simple. All we're doing is we're removing anything that is not rubbish, right? That's all we're doing. So, there's a non-existent land far, far away. There's a robotic monster. But all of this information is not important to us. So what is important is that we're removing anything in the list that's not rubbish. Wicked. So now we've used abstraction to remove the unnecessary detail, which is a key thing as a developer. It's a key skill to have. So what's our next step now? Do you remember? Wicked. So we're still not going to rush into the code. We're going to do a little bit of planning. So we're just going to write a few notes here. Okay? A few notes for what we're going to do. What are the steps? So what do you think the first step is going to be? We've done a bit of coding now. We've learned about for loops and if statements. What are we going to do? What's the first thing we're going to do? And by the way, don't worry about using technical lingo. Don't worry about thinking about the coding too much. Just imagine you're given this problem with pen and paper. Break down what you would do. Obviously using the coding structures. You can't just say remove anything that's not rubbish. That's quite simple. If it was to break it down into a logical step-by-step process with pen and paper, so you're not too overwhelmed by the code, what would you do? Good. So the first step we're going to do is we're just going to, go through each item, right? Go through each item. Okay. Then what we're going to do, once we go through each item, good, we're going to check if it's rubbish. We're going to check if it's rubbish. What are we going to do next? Nice. So if it is rubbish, we're going to keep it. If it's not, we'll get rid of it, right? So if it's rubbish, keep it. Otherwise, get rid of it. In this case, the monster will eat it. But don't worry too much about these words like keep it and get rid of it. I know that it might be a bit of a challenge to translate that into code later on, but for now, it gives us a structure to work with. Okay? So now, it's basically a 3-step process, right? That's what we're doing. So, I've defined the function here for us, or I've predefined it, and we're going to fill this in now. So let's try and run this. Let's see what happens. We just get done. Nothing's coming up now because the examples are here. So we're going to try. So this this list should return rubbish. In our case, it's returning none. Good. So we've got no errors so far. Everything's working okay, except that our function is not returning what it should return. So let's follow our notes, Sammy. Let's follow our notes step by step, and let's try and convert these notes into code. So go through each item. What does that remind you of in code? Good. A for loop. Well done. So for loop will help us go through each item. So do you know the key word for going through items in a list? Iterate. Well done. Iteration. That's the key word that we're looking for. So let's iterate through this list. Good. So write it out for us. So write out the for loop. Do you remember the syntax? Good, you do. Okay, let's do it. So for I in food items. Okay, well done. So Sammy, if you remember from before, remember how we talked about how naming is really important in coding? Because if a developer comes after you or a coder comes after you and reads your code, the names that you give your variables are going to be very important so that they can read your code. So here you've written I. So in this case, I is not going to really help our developer. We could give this a better name. Can you think of a better name? Good. For food item. In food items. So I just feel like it's a lot clearer, more readable. Don't you think so? Nice. Because it kind of reads like English now, isn't it? For food item in food items. So each time we iterate over this list, it's going to go through and it's going to take each of these, each iteration, and it's going to take it and put it in our variable. Good. So let's stop here. Let's just use print, right? Let's just see. It's a really good habit to print. Every time you write a bit of code, print so you can see what's going on. So let's just print food item. Let's see what comes out. Just hit run. Good. So it's just printing out each element. So it's going through these two lists, okay? Because it runs this one and then it runs that one, and it's just printing out each element. So now we have access to each of these. So we can tick off step 1, right? Good. So what do we want to do next? We want to check if it's rubbish. What does that remind you of? What coding construct can we use here? Excellent. If statement. Well done. So we're just going to say what? If what? So if food item is equal to, excellent, rubbish. Right, well done. So food item is equal to rubbish. What are we going to do? What should we do? Keep it. So before we move on to this step, Sammy, I think you've made like a small error. I think you've maybe forgotten something. You can see that the code editor is telling you there's a squiggly line. It's telling you invalid syntax. What do you think you've forgotten? Good. Excellent. You've forgotten the code. Well done. And well done for using the the comparison operator as well instead of the assignment operator, because that's a very common mistake. This wouldn't give you the right answer. This wouldn't compare the two, okay? Because a 1 equals sign is just assignment. If I said a equals 2, I'm assigning the integer 2 to the variable a. But if I do a double equals 2, this is now comparing the two. Are the two the same? It's going to give it true or false. So in this case, we want to use the comparison operator, which you've done. Well done. So if food item is equal to rubbish, what are we going to do? We're going to keep it. This is very vague. How can we translate this into some code? You've done a bit of coding now, so do you think you can kind of understand? You can give us the next step. Excellent. What we'll do, instead of for keeping it, what we'll do is we'll just push it into a new list. So at the top here, outside of the for loop, let's define a new list. So I don't know, we'll call it rubbish or something. Right. So that's how we define a list. So now, how do we add elements to a list? Wicked. Append. So let's do that. So rubbish dot append. And what do we put in here? Our food item. Hold on. And then what we're going to do at the end? Good, we'll return it. We'll just return rubbish at the end. Because after it iterates through the for loop and it checks each item and it pushes all the items into rubbish up here into our list, we just need to return it. Wicked, so let's hit run and see if we get what we want. Well done. So it's returned what it's supposed to return. Well done, Sammy. Excellent. So just a quick question, Sammy, before we end off. Why did you put rubbish? Why did you assign rubbish to an empty list outside of the for loop and not inside of the for loop? It's a really key question here. Well done. Because if we put it inside of the for loop, which we'll do right now, let's do it right now. Let's see what happens. If you put it inside of the for loop like this, every time we go through the list, we go through each item, every time we iterate, on each iteration, it's going to overwrite rubbish, right? So if I run this, we only get 1 instead of 2. Because each time we go through, it overwrites the variable, and it sets it back to an empty list, which is what we don't want. And that's why we keep it outside of the for loop. So we get our result. Well done, Sammy. Really happy with your progress today. Well done. Hopefully that helped. And, next lesson we'll do something a bit more interesting, hopefully. Thank you.